bow hunting is a serious challenge. While it'd be perfectly safe to do, you would need a coalition of homeowners to give you access to their land. What better thing than if I could teach people to hunt for a living? You know, there's like 8 or 9 million people here. There's got to be at least like a couple thousand of them that have the means and the desire to do that. I have challenges with some of my clients because they aspire to bow hunting immediately. I've not really bought meat in a grocery store since I moved out of the dorm in college. The convenience factor is the biggest barrier to most people entering hunting. I'm Fisher Neal with Learn to Hunt NYC, and you're listening to the Wild Initiative.
Put down your latte and pull on your boots.
Our culture needs people that are leaders and not people that are waiting for somebody else to show them how to do it.
Those fields of tofu, that was formerly habitat for wildlife. You're killing off wildlife by being a vegetarian just as much as a hunter when he kills a deer.
I'm like, well, you see that bush right there? There's your bathroom. Yeah.
My dad wears a Levi jacket. He sits in front of a sagebrush and he tells me the best camo is hold still.
Not to Donnie Vincent this, but be relentless in everything you do. Don't crap out, go back to the truck with excuses or whatever.
Okay, assume I get a deer. How do I cut it up to fit into a Honda Civic?
Just get outside and go, because once you do, it's all gravy from there.
Hey, this is Zach Griffith.
This is Hannah Barron.
This is Jason Phelps of Phelps Game Calls.
Hey guys, this is Cody Rich from the Rich Outdoors Podcast.
What's up guys, this is Chad Mendez.
You're listening to The Wild Initiative.
Hey y'all, welcome to another episode of The Wild Initiative. Today I am on the line with Fisher Neal of Learn to Hunt NYC. Fisher's got kind of an interesting background I'm excited to talk about, but we don't have many Yale Drama School graduates on the podcast. So I think this is going to be a fun one. Fisher, thanks so much for taking the time to hop on with me today.
Thanks, man. I'm excited to be on.
So just to start out, why don't you give a little bit of an introduction about yourself and how you were introduced to hunting and the outdoors?
Yeah, I was lucky in that regard. My dad grew up in a rural part of Tennessee, and by the time I was born was an avid outdoorsman, hunting and fishing. So, you know, my earliest memories are of him going hunting and wanting to go with him. And thankfully, he was the kind of dad who was really hoping I would want that. And so, you know, at the age of 4 or 5, I was tagging along and begging to take hunter's ed long before I could read. And, you know, so I killed my first dove when I was probably 10 years old and my first deer when I was 11. And it's really just been, you know, probably the biggest passion of my life ever since then. Yeah, like a lot of people, it's been a huge thing for me ever since I was a little kid.
So then you took a bit of a departure from hunting. What took you away from that?
Yeah, man. I mean, I was one of these kids. I didn't really know who I was. I didn't have a lot of self-esteem. But I started doing a whole lot of like impressions from movies like Ace Ventura and Forrest Gump. And my dad was like, you need to take speech class, son. You know, you need to do public speaking. And he put me up in front of people, got me, you know, leading stuff in church. And I found that I had a knack for public speaking, and that led me into taking some acting classes in high school and doing the high school musical. And I fell in love with doing that too. And it didn't occur to me until probably like early in college that it was something I might have the opportunity to pursue as a career. I thought, you know, like the only thing I could really perceive was like you were either like a famous person, you know, like a famous actor in the movies or TV, or nothing else. I didn't realize that there were like lots and lots of working actors in television or regional theater. Anyway, I ended up just like making the very poor decision to pursue that as a career.
Trust me, I'm from Los Angeles, so I know a lot of people that have made exact same poor decision. They would say the same thing.
Yeah, it's probably like one of the worst career paths you could attempt. But I did it. And, you know, I always thought that it was going to cost me dearly when it came to my ability to hunt and fish, because I knew eventually I was going to have to move to, you know, New York or LA. And most likely anyway, there's not really a way to have a career that that stands out. You know what I mean? It becomes something that's really economically viable for you unless you go to one of those places. And, you know, living in Tennessee, I'm from Knoxville, you know, living there and, you know, having visited New York once, the idea that you could still hunt anywhere near there was like mind blowing to me, to the point that I assumed it wasn't possible. You know what I mean? It was, you know, only after grad school, or actually during grad school, when I was doing research trying to figure out where around New York City I was going to move, did I discover that New Jersey actually has a huge amount of public land that's within an hour drive of New York, and it's got a ton of deer on it. So I've ended up being in a situation where I have access to really good hunting and the ability to audition for, you know, TV and Broadway and everything right in Manhattan.
So, you know, everybody, when you say New York, like, you know, and I feel like I've talked about this on the podcast once or twice. It's, you know, it's similar to saying California. You know, people have very specific pictures, very specific ideas. Like you say California, everyone's going to picture LA, San Francisco, maybe like the beaches in San Diego. And that's, you know, all encompassing.
Mm-hmm.
Same thing with New York. You say New York, everyone's going to picture Manhattan, you know, or they're going to picture, you know, the city. You know, maybe talk a little bit about the opportunity that's available around there and what actually makes up the state.
Yeah, well, it's so true, man. I was one of those people. Like, I referred to New Jersey as the armpit of America, because it really feels that way if you visit it the way most people do, which is like you're landing at Newark Airport and then traveling into Manhattan, or you're traveling up the I-95 corridor. And what you drive through is like this gigantic industrial, what's really an arm of New York City, you know, through Elizabeth and, you know, the port, and you've got oil tanks and all these like, yeah, these just like giant, filthy industrial landscapes everywhere. And you really feel like that's what New Jersey is, and that the thing they call a garden state is just a load of shit. But, you know, the reality is there's a ton of people concentrated in here, but there's just a ton of wildlife, really. I mean, the biggest issue is access. Like in New York, you have tons of deer in Westchester County, which, for those who don't know, Westchester County sits right on top of New York City. You know what I mean? So like if you get north of the Bronx, once you leave the Bronx, which is its own county, you hit Westchester County. And Westchester County is like, you know, very affluent, extensive suburbs. It's like nothing but like wooded suburban landscape. And, you know, it has an enormous number of deer, but the access in there is super limited. You know, you've got you can only hunt with a bow, and there's almost no public land at all. It's entirely private. But once you get like above Westchester County, then you start to be in a situation where like there are actually tons of giant pieces of land in upstate New York. You know, you have the Catskill Mountains, the Adirondack Mountains, which are the two biggest, you know, most obvious ones, but there's tons and tons more. You know, the challenge with that is most of them are like an hour and a half to 2 hours minimum from the city. So it's not like a day trip capable type of thing. Westchester County is totally doable, and there's loads of deer. There's also a whole lot of waterfowl that come and they winter, you know, because everything around New York and Long Island and this part of New Jersey is all like coastal marshland. You know what I mean? Like waterfowl want to be here in the wintertime. So there is the possibility of accessing that. The challenge there, of course, is like, if you live around here, where can you keep a duck boat? You know,
yeah,
having a garage is like a massive luxury here. But you know, so like this is why actually I ended up moving to New Jersey, because New Jersey has a bunch of WMAs and state parks and stuff that are all, you know, in the like 50 to 75 minute drive range, so that they're doable from a day trip perspective. And the thing, I used to bartend in the city a lot, and I'd sometimes get people from southern states or the Midwest and I talked to them about the fact that I was a hunter, and I would always blow their mind with the fact that like antlerless harvest in a majority of the state is unlimited. And the season goes from mid-September to mid-February. We're dealing with places where the whitetails are 50 per square mile in some of the places where you can hunt, and 100 per square mile in the places where you can't.
Well, I remember
so they're
reading articles a few years back about how they're having to legitimately like hire snipers to take out and then I think there was the whole campaign to like neuter all the deer around the city, or like chemically neuter them. And like it's
man,
crazy.
It's a real issue here. I mean, so New York City, with hunting is banned within New York City, and Staten Island is a part of New York City. And at some point, like 10 years ago, some deer swam across the river from New Jersey, and now they've got thousands and thousands of deer on there because they have no predators and abundant suburban lawns to feed on. So the city spent like over the last few years, I think $3 or $4 or $5, I can't remember exactly what the numbers are, $1 million on a sterilization program. What they're doing, I think, is they're like baiting and then darting bucks, and then they are they're neutering the bucks. I don't know if they're neutering them or if they're just I think they may be performing vasectomies on them.
Okay.
But they say that they have supposedly done like 98% of the bucks on the island, from what I read recently. But the city just re-upped for like another $3 million for another 2 years to continue the program. The thing that's really, it blows my mind because, of course, it only takes like one buck to swim across that river again from New Jersey. After you've stopped the program, within a year or two, you're going to have tons of deer running around again.
Yeah.
And even so, it's like, the deer that are there are going to take 10 or 15 years. Well, maybe not 15, but, they're going to take 10 years to die out. So it's like in that space of time, you're going to have more deer show up. It's, in my mind, obviously not a very practical solution. But I mean, there is the real problem that like the deer are able to inhabit a landscape, which even like bow hunting is a serious challenge, because while it'd be perfectly safe to do, you would need a coalition of homeowners to give you access to their land. We're talking about, landscapes where like there's not like somebody's backwoods that's even an acre where you could kind of reliably count on the deer to pile up if you make a good shot. Like, every freaking couple hundred feet is somebody's different property. So, only if you had like 20 or 30 homeowners in a cluster who are all like, yes, we want the deer hunted. Here's permission, Fisher, to go in there with a bow, and whoever's place you think you want to hunt on, you can. And then, you can cross and recover it wherever like that level of organization would be required in a lot of these places. And I don't think that's ever going to happen,
Yeah. Especially I have a feeling that a lot the good majority of the people that live in Staten Island, while they're sick of the deer, they probably also don't want to see anybody in their front yard plugging one, whether or not they want to get rid of them. They don't, versus you go somewhere else and people be like, oh yeah, you'll hold the hunting you want. Yeah. It's just you get a little bit of everything here, like there's definitely a lack of trust of other humans that comes with living in this density. There's enough assholes that you really can't trust too much of anybody who's a stranger, because you never know which one of them is going to be that guy or girl. Well, heck, I know if I lived in New York, or even when I was in Los Angeles, I wouldn't let anybody, if that was flipped around, I honestly probably wouldn't let anybody on my lawn. Exactly. Versus, maybe I'm in, who knows, maybe I'm in Montana or I'm in Texas or whatever. I'd be a lot more likely to let a let a neighbor or somebody access my property than I would in the middle of the city. I just feel like it's like you're saying, the density is so different. You can get to know people a little bit better in a different way.
Yeah. And there's a huge additional trust gap in understanding of, say, bow hunting and how safe it is. Like the odds, for example, that I'm going to shoot your dog or your child while I'm bow hunting in your backyard are zero. There's zero chance that I'm going to confuse your dog or your kid, or like have a ricochet that hits them when I'm 20 feet up in a tree and shooting down. But most people, even people who are in favor of ethical hunting and don't understand that. You know what I mean? They think of hunting and they think guns. They think hunting is stalking from the ground. So they're thinking, okay, it's going to ricochet along the ground. It's like there's just a huge gap of understanding as well that you have to overcome. But I do find people, like in Jersey, I've had success getting access to public lands and sometimes even to private lands by knocking on doors. You do still get people who are fed up with the deer and who get it enough that if you seem reasonable, then they'll just let you hunt their place. Usually what I get is access. So I'll knock on the door and say, there's this public land that's kind of landlocked behind you. Would it be cool if I, traverse your yard and woods to get back there? And sometimes people are like, no, please don't ever come back. And other times people are like, heck yeah, man, I'm so sick of the deer. If you see them in my yard, shoot them.
So we've talked a lot about all of this opportunity that's available, out in New York, out in New Jersey, the, areas outside of the city, even not that far from the city. Tell me a little bit about your Learn to Hunt NYC. Yes.
So I got the idea to start this because being an actor, I had such, regular and close contact with essentially the most city-fied progressive demographic you could. And I found to my surprise that the people I was around were actually really captivated with the idea of hunting meat for food. There's a lot of people, I would even say maybe a majority of people up here who are kind of caught up in the trophy hunting myth that people just go and shoot animals and leave them to rot in the woods and stuff. But once people realized that's not what I was, all of a sudden I was the coolest person in the room. So, that led me then when I came to New York, every actor needs a day job, even actors who are doing pretty well, unless you've had a lot of success in TV and film or something, you need other ways to make income between gigs. And I just thought, man, if people are willing to pay me, what better thing than if I could teach people to hunt for a living? There's 8 or 9 million people here. There's got to be at least a couple thousand of them that have the means and the desire to do that. If I could just get in front of them. So I was like, what the hell? The beauty of the modern world is that you can make a website, for hardly anything. And, I used a very common service, and they have a search engine optimization wizard, get it all set up so that if somebody Googles Learn to Hunt in New York City, I'm the top hit right off the bat. And so that led to emails and, for a while, because we didn't have an apprentice license yet, it was actually really difficult to take people out. But now that the apprentice license has become a thing, the business is just blown up and is pretty much doubled each of the last 3 years. And most of the time I'm working with people who have no experience at all. They're complete noobs, maybe they've fished or something, or they are into the outdoors through hiking. But in a lot of cases, that's not it at all. They're usually inspired by somebody like Joe Rogan or Steve Rinella. And I'll take them. What I'll do is I really push people towards using crossbow for a wide range of reasons. in part, because that's the longest season that I have. And so I'll take them out. We spend like an hour on a shooting range, teach them to shoot well enough, explain to them shot placement and what the hunting scenario is going to be like, give them enough time to practice and get familiar with that weapon. Then I take them on a scouting hike, and I basically just dump as much knowledge about scouting and tracking as I can on them. I try to make sure that we hit all the different relevant signs, and I make sure for sure that they know how to identify like oak trees, differentiate between red and white oaks, and identify beech trees, and as much as I can about that stuff. And we talk about foraging a lot too, and that goes on, mushroom hunting and wild berries and things if we come across them. And then we move from that into an afternoon sit. New Jersey's a bait state, so I'm able to set up a baited location, usually with a tree stand in advance. Although sometimes during the rut, I don't bother with bait because the deer move so much. But when somebody's only hunting one afternoon and they're a beginner, I try to give them the highest success rate possible. Mm-hmm. And also I find that understandably, beginners are not nearly as well equipped as a more experienced person to deal with like needing to stop a deer that's moving, or they really are helped a lot by an animal that will approach and stop somewhere in an opening for them and give them some time.
It's removing those additional complexities to the hunt, so they can then take those different pieces on one at a time. So start out
exactly
with that simplicity. Then, a few hunts later, maybe next time, then they do it a little bit differently, and they add that because they're more experienced with everything else. And, it's the age old illustration of, peeling back an onion. So one layer at a time.
That's exactly right. It's exactly right. And it's an issue that I deal with. Actually, I have challenges with some of my clients because they aspire to bow hunting immediately, because they see it. They've learned to see it through whatever media they've consumed, that, bow hunting is a more like honorable, challenging, ethical way of hunting. Right.
Well, it's romantic.
And so
it's like
yes,
it's that. Yeah, it's that connection. It's that romanticism of it.
That's exactly right. So what I run into then is that like those people, of course, have no idea the layer of complexity that they're adding on top of the hunting, by doing a compound versus a crossbow. And I'm constantly telling them, like, I know you've got your own bow. I know you've been shooting in the indoor shooting range for the past 2 years, but I'm telling you, this is a whole different can of worms. And if you want to have success, the thing to do, my advice is always start easy and then work your way up. After you've killed one or two with a crossbow and it feels easy, then okay, let's up the ante and do the compound. But some people still, I can't get them to do it. I actually have one guy who started with a compound. We didn't have success. And then the next year he upgraded. He's now hunting with a primitive bow. So his effective range is like 10 yards. And I'm trying so hard to get this guy a deer. But it's a challenge, and he is not following my advice. He's doing what he wants to do. And, if he wants to hire me to, teach him and to get him as close to game as I can, then I'll keep on doing that gladly. But my advice to beginners is start easy and then work your way up. It's the analogy I use is it's like if you started a video game on the highest level of difficulty setting, like you just get destroyed over and over again, and you don't even learn that much because you're just getting shredded. You've got to build some skills and like get a foundation under you and then move on.
Oh, trust me, you are preaching to the choir with that. And I'm not sure if you're as familiar with my story, but my very first hunt was a solo DIY archery elk hunt on public land in Idaho.
Oh, wow. That was your first hunt?
My very first hunt.
Wow.
So suffice to say, I fell victim to that romanticism, and well, I did and I didn't. I did for the first couple of days, and then I tore both of my knees. So that's a whole different thing. Most of my listeners have heard that story 100 times, and I've got I think it's episode 39 or so of the podcast. I talk about it, but yeah, suffice to say, I always recommend that people do it very differently than I did. I mean, that being said, too, if you want to go, you want to go shoot an elk with your bow, there's only one way you're going to do that, and that's by chasing an elk with your bow. But I'd also recommend doing other stuff too, and being, open to maybe hunting a rifle season as well, or, you have to understand what you get yourself into, but
yeah, teach their own. If people want to start that way, by all means. There's my advice: take it or leave it.
Yeah, I know exactly where you're coming from, because, like I said, I always recommend to people, don't do what I did. Do things the smart way. You'll have a much better time of it. But you know what? Somebody's going to do what they want to do, and more power to them if they're finding joy in the process. And and the gentleman you were talking about, he may be having the time of his life, with that primitive bow, and that may be what's important to him. That may be shooting something with his primitive bow may be 10 times more important to him than just harvesting something. Which, again,
we've talked about it. And that's exactly, he's like, I don't care if it takes me 10 years. Like, I want to be out here and have this experience and like do it this way. And I'm like, great. That's awesome.
It's funny, as you've been talking, I was just kind of thinking, and you talk a lot about, your interaction with these folks. And I've had, again, a very similar experience, because I worked in the music industry as well as advertising for a long time. So, short of the film and television industry, it's about, the second most liberal industry you can get. And a lot of very anti-hunting sentiment. And so I've had very similar experiences where, once you get past that kind of trophy hunting discussion and with a lot of those people, but I always wonder I think it does connect with a lot of folks in industries like that, especially kind of acting, film, and television, because there's so much of a story behind it, if you will. People are, what you do for a living. I mean, what you do as an actor is you invest in stories and characters, and it's a similar process with hunting. Like you're building, you're almost building this character, and there's such a romantic story with it, and the process and the connection with the history. I feel like it's very intertwined. And I think, you had mentioned people get really fascinated with it, and you kind of become the coolest guy in the room. And I think there's a big relation with that.
Yeah, definitely, man. Definitely. And especially, the stories that people hear now about agriculture are, mass animal agriculture are all negative. So they're looking for a way to continue to eat meat, but have a story that's positive, or at least that's positive. And I think that that's got a lot to do with why people are drawn to me and to learning about hunting. I think also just because it's so far removed from their experience too. You know what I mean? Like, most folks have never met someone like me. I've not really bought meat in a grocery store since I moved out of the dorm in college. And to somebody who's been, living in a big city their entire life, that's just like the craziest thing they've ever heard of. So
obviously, some of your answer would be make sure to check out learntohuntnyc.com. But say, you're on set, or you're, just even at the grocery store or whatever, and you're talking to someone and the topic of hunting comes up. And this person, I'm sure you've had this conversation a million times, but this person says, oh man, I've always been interested in that, but I live here in the city. I have no friends that hunt. I have no relatives that hunt. Like, I don't even know where to start. There's all this stuff I have to learn. It seems really complicated. Maybe it's not for me. What would you say to that person? How would you encourage them, or what words of wisdom would you give them?
My first advice to them usually is take hunter ed. You know, not just because it's the mandatory thing, but it's a concrete step in the direction of what you want to do. In a lot of states you still cannot hunt with an apprentice license, even if you have someone willing to mentor you. And it's now possible. This is the other thing, is I'm always alerting people to the reality that it's now possible to take hunter ed entirely online. It doesn't matter where you live. Do you know about this? A lot of people don't know about this. I know at least in California, you have to do a follow-up course if you take it online, but I didn't know New York allows you to do it fully online. New York doesn't. See, this is the thing. Hunter education certificates have nationwide reciprocity, right? Because Colorado can't make any money if I have to take Colorado's hunter education course before I can go hunt elk with a non-resident tag, right? And that applies everywhere. So they have nationwide reciprocity, no matter where the certificate comes from. Certain states, the state of Pennsylvania and the state of Idaho, have it set up in such a way that a non-resident over the age of 18 can take an entirely online hunter education course. And they will mail you a valid certificate. PA is, at least the last time I checked, you could just do the firearm course. And in Idaho, you can just do the bow hunter certification. But in both cases, you can do that. You have to pay because it's through that paid site. But it's like $25 a pop. And from the comfort of your own home, you can get a valid hunter education certificate mailed to you that you can then turn around and use in whatever state you are. Unless, probably most states have not yet caught up to creating a rule to block that. So it's a really great thing. And I actually learned that from one of my clients who was a doctor. He was like, did you know that you could do this? And so now I tell all my clients, I tell everybody this, because for most people, and this is one of the biggest things that I run into or that I have learned through running this business, is that like the convenience factor is the biggest barrier to most people entering hunting. So, but once people have had a taste of it, once people start to get involved, then all of a sudden they become like us, and the motivation, you make time for it. You know what I mean? Like you build your life around it. But you don't do that until you've already experienced it.
Well, and I get it, because for most places, at least a lot of places out here, and I know every state and every county is different, but it's like you've got maybe 2 options a month for taking the in-person class. And then
exactly,
it's an hour and a half away or 45 minutes away. And it's an all-day commitment, and it's a big deal. It's not like I wouldn't really look forward to doing that necessarily anymore. Like, it's one thing committing to going hunting. It's another thing to commit to, and I'll admit, so often, so many of these in-person classes, it's like an old boys club.
Yes.
Like it's getting better, because I think, but I feel like we almost missed a generation when it came to hunting. And, we had, we're 1 or 2 generations removed. And so now we're finally getting a younger set of people into this hunter ed course. But so often you roll in and it's an 80-year-old dude who's literally just reading a PowerPoint presentation the entire time. And I want to shoot myself in the face. Yes. Like, it's not fun. It's not interesting. It doesn't get me excited to hunt. But then, I have buddies that do it now, and they are fantastic at it. So, there's always opportunities, but being able to, if you're trying to mentor someone, if you're trying to get someone out, being able to tell them, just go online, do this course. It'll cost you $25. Then you can apply, once you get your license number, you can apply for a license, which is funny. I feel like I should have figured that out, because I use my Idaho bow hunters certification for, there's several other states that require you to have a bow hunter certification. And I use that one across the board. So I never even thought about, taking hunter safety that way.
Yeah. Well, the only reason you didn't think about it is because it wasn't something you needed to think about. You know what I mean? I'm thinking about this stuff because I'm like making my living based around whether or not these things can be done. You know, most hunters in New Jersey, even though we've had it for like 3 years now, they don't even know that we have an apprentice license or what it is, you know, because it's not relevant. They haven't bothered to like look into it, you know?
Mm-hmm.
But, I mean, if people are willing to take that step, it's amazing the number of people who are still not really motivated enough to take that step and do it online. And at a certain point, it's like you have to take some initiative to get that thing going for yourself. But that's the first thing I tell people. After that, aside from, book a hunt with me, please. I tell them, you know, there's a remarkable number of people who are willing to mentor out there, and social media is a really good way to find them. I find that there are some very active Facebook groups in New York and New Jersey. I'm sure there are probably some very active ones elsewhere. There are also, you know, when I first came to Jersey, I was fairly active on like a forum, old school, like message board website. Even as an experienced hunter, you know, I was able to find some folks who were willing to take me around, show me places where they used to hunt, if they were like retired guys, or, you know what I mean? Like, and this message about like recruitment and mentoring is one that I think a lot of experienced hunters are taking to heart. So I really do think that, you know, blind posting into a Facebook group, hey, I'm new. Would anybody be willing to, you know, let me tag along or show me something, anything, you know, I think people would be surprised at the like total strangers who they would end up hunting with.
So we were talking a bit earlier, and you mentioned something about you had an idea for mentor seasons.
Yes. I was sitting around smoking weed the other day, and I had an actually good idea. You know, sometimes you get ideas when you're smoking weed, and you think it's great then, and then you sober up, and it's really not that good of an idea. But this one I've stuck to, and I think it's a really good idea. You know, we have youth days. Why don't we also have mentoring days, which could also be a youth day, a bonus youth day? You know what I mean? Where only hunters utilizing an apprentice license or, you know, on their very first hunting license are allowed to hunt, you know, and they have to be accompanied by a mentor or whatever. And the reason that I feel like it's really important that we do that is because what I have observed in my business, which is that the number of available days has a massive impact on the number of people who try the sport. Because, you know, like in the last week of the season in February, we have, you know, the season goes into mid-February here. On like February 9th, some guy emailed me and said, man, I just like had this idea and decided that I wanted to try hunting, and I found you. Like, do you have any availability coming up? And that Saturday I took him hunting, right? If there wasn't an open season in February, that guy would have missed that. And he would have had to wait until September. And from my experience in the past, when people have to wait to like follow through on that impulse, the majority of them do not. Mm-hmm. So, you know, like we honestly should be having like mentoring seasons wherever it's not going to affect the game management goals. You know what I mean? Give apprentices an extra 3 weeks, an extra month in which they could potentially hunt with a mentor. You know, maybe they can only, if it's a big game, maybe they can only harvest one animal during that time, whatever restrictions you got to put on it so that it doesn't affect, you know, the overall management goals, but still allows like a massively increased number of days that a person can get in the woods. Because when you think about it, like most gun seasons are what, like between 2 and 4 weeks, mm-hmm. Like, you know, and unless it's a state where you have a whole lot of crossbow hunting, that might be the only window where a beginner could really, most beginners could easily jump in and try things out. So yeah, I think it's something that like, I now want to like shout to the hills that we need to be pushing for. You know what I mean?
There you go. You got to hit up New Jersey Fish and Game.
It's true. Well, I mean, New Jersey Fish and Game already has it. They already have it going on, right? Because the deer season is so long. Mm-hmm. It's sort of because of how they have everything set up that I've realized.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? What's missing?
Mm-hmm.
You know, the ability to use a crossbow in bow season is just huge.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like in New York State, you can only use a crossbow during, like, I think the muzzleloader season and the gun season. You can't use it very much during, like, or at all during the proper archery season. And I totally get why that is, but of course it severely limits, it's cutting in half probably the number of days that a true beginner could really get out there and try it out easily. New Jersey's awesome. I can't believe I'm saying that as a person born in Tennessee, but it's really true, man. They've got a lot of stuff going right here with Fish and Game.
So if folks wanted to find Learn to Hunt NYC, where can they do that? And where can they follow along with everything you got going on? Yeah,
I mean, if you Google Learn to Hunt, you'll find me pretty darn quick. LearnToHuntNYC.com is the website if you want to go direct to it. I have a Facebook page, but I'm most active on Instagram at Hunting Actor. It's a very derivative name, but it fits.
A little bit on the nose there. What can you do?
Yeah. So is Learn to Hunt NYC. I'm kind of an on the nose type of guy, I guess.
There you go.
It works. It works for me.
All right. Well, y'all, make sure you head on over to the show notes page. You can get links to everything we talked about there. Give Fisher a follow if you are in the area or heading to the area. Make sure you check out Learn to Hunt NYC. Fisher, thanks for sitting down, taking the time to talk.
My pleasure, man. It was good times. I hope I get to come back.
Hell yeah. All right, y'all, that'll do it for this episode of The Wild Initiative. Make sure you check out the show notes page at thewildinitiative.com. Get links to everything we talked about in today's episode. That'll do it for this week. Looking forward to next time. But until then, I hope this episode inspired you to get involved, get outdoors, and plan your initiative for the wild.
Thank you for listening to The Wild Initiative. Please take a moment to leave a rating and review on iTunes or Stitcher, and head on over to thewildinitiative.com to get show notes, check out the blog, gear discounts, other podcasts from the Wild Initiative family, and more.